Blog audiences, both in Ethiopia and the diaspora. This is Lidette again, here with a special guest today. I'm joined by Daniel Yasu, who is from the Washington, D.C. area. I've had the honor of working with him in the last few months, and I happen to run into some work that he has done. So I have invited him to be our guest so that he can share some of the work that he does, as well as the topic that we're currently discussing. I would give the chance, I would go on and say a lot about Daniel, but I'm going to give him the chance to introduce himself to the audience, tell us about himself and his background. Daniel, welcome to our show, Crime Log. Please introduce yourself to our audiences. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Lidette, for inviting me to the show. I really appreciate it. So my name is Daniel. I'm originally from Ethiopia. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. My background in terms of education is I come from a scientific background. I was a biochemist originally, and then I worked in that field for a while. I have a degree in food security, graduate degree in food security. I also have another graduate degree in international commerce and policy. So I'm like a hodgepodge. I got a mix of all kinds of information. Hopefully it'll be useful to you. But specifically, for in the case of Ethiopia, I follow the current events. I'm very much involved in researching the social media trends in Ethiopia. I think it's very interesting what's happening. It's somewhat dangerous, but I think it's something that needs to be noticed, and that's something I've been kind of personally researching the last 6 years, and have extensive studies among some of my colleagues and also by myself. So I've taken a lot of information in. I've compiled a lot of data regarding that, and overall, I haven't really got a chance to talk to a wider audience like this, but I think it's time to come to the front because our country is definitely going through some important reforms. There are some good trends, but there are also some pitfalls that we have to watch out for. So very much looking forward to our discussion today.
Did you tell us where you were born, raised, and...
Yeah, I was born in Addis Ababa. I grew up in Addis Ababa until I was about 7 years old, and my family immigrated here, like most of us. And so the rest of my life, I grew up in America. So I'm like an American Ethiopian or an Ethiopian American, whichever way you want to say it. But I love my country. I love my people. I'm very much in touch. I'm not as much removed. And I think, growing up in this area helped me kind of stay in touch too, because you can't really go too far away without being connected with your people here in the DMV area. There's so many of us. So I think that kept me kind of in tune to the ground, I guess you can call it that way. So yeah, that's pretty much my background. I grew up in a family of four, not a big family, but I have a very large extended family in the United States. So I learned, from my family, from my friends, from the people I grew up with, through my research in food security, in international commerce and policy, biochemistry. So I don't want to say too much. I'm not really fond of speaking about myself. So I just would rather just get to it.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Okay, well, let's start our discussion. One of the reasons why I asked you to come and be a guest is because I saw the paper that you prepared or you wrote about social media and the effects that it has on Ethiopia. And I thought you did an excellent job, very convincing, and obviously it's something that we're witnessing. So I really thought it was a good topic to discuss, especially because we're heading towards election, and obviously it's a time where there's a lot of controversial stuff. So what is the impact of social media related to Ethiopia? What are the positives and what are the negatives? Like, what kind of impact is social media making in Ethiopia?
That's a wide scoping question. I think it's very important to understand the intrinsic design of social media, and that the fact that it's based on algorithms, and the algorithm that generates kind of what we call an echo chamber. So I think it's ill-informed to assume that the Ethiopian body politic can survive the inherently siloed and echo chamber algorithms, let's say say Facebook or YouTube, right? So the very nature of these platforms is fundamentally suited to parse political viewpoints alongside factions and sectarian lines. And what I mean by this is like the content we like and share on these platforms are the ones that will appear more or less, right? Will appear on our feed. So now if you take that trend and you multiply it over hundreds and thousands of contexts, the interactions that you get is basically an echo chamber. So you're going to be fed things that you like. You're only going to see things that you like. You're only going to see things that you comment on. So over time, you're going to be kind of in this silo world. You're not really going to see what's outside of that. You're not going to be, it's only going to show you something that you already know. So if you're, say, a particular viewpoint in politics, or you come from a particular ethnic background, or you support a particular political party, and you like that content, you're going to see that over and over and over again. So over time, that platform is going to just tell you that it's going to reaffirm what you are viewing already, that you're right. It's never really going to question your views. So this creates a huge amount of polarization in population. And in that environment where a person only encounters information or opinions that reflect and reinforce their own opinions, that becomes problematic for a democratic society. So, I'm pretty sure you guys have seen this before. If you're in this country, supporters of Trump only see content that Trump supporters see, and it reinforces their worldview. And if same thing, if on the Democratic side, on the left side, it's the same thing. Now you take this to Ethiopia, where you have ethnic politics, where you have religious sectarianism, you have growing tensions, and you have different, very very different contentious kind of narratives. And then you have the growing volume of social media content and the growing usership in Ethiopia. This really bifurcates society and it divides people further. We already have a divided society. We all know that. And there has been division amongst Ethiopians based on, sectarian lines, whether it's ethnic or religious, for a while now. And it's just going to make that worse because of the inherent nature of the way these algorithms work. So there's that basic, platform, or the basic nature of social media itself. And then you add to that, you have disinformation by design, basically, which means is you're using false accounts, you're using, again, narratives, emotional content. So we've seen this starting in about 2014 in Ethiopia, where the former ruling party, the EPRDF, created thousands of false accounts to basically counter the opposition politics as well as spread their own. And of course, over time, after the EPRDF and the digital wing naturally morphed into what we now call digital Wayane, or more colloquially, this group is known as a COCAS. You probably have heard that term before. In Addis Ababa, the more tech savvy people in Addis Ababa, they call them COCAS, digital Wayanes. They've been around for a while. And I think now, as things stand, we have a myriad of actors on social media whose sole purpose is disinformation and misinformation around current events in Ethiopia. And this is happening both on social media and also on traditional media. So we can't forget that it's happening on traditional media as well. Moreover, there are thousands of social media narratives coming out of what seems to be like, Egyptian National Security Agency. Increasingly, we're seeing, local language use by foreign intelligence agencies to influence events in Ethiopia. And if you noticed recently, there was news reports of, websites or Facebook accounts that were run from Egypt, directly targeting Ethiopia, that Facebook had to shut down. This was in early April 2021. And you guys, everybody can go back and look that up. And that's only the tip of the iceberg. Then I'm saying, now they're using local language. They're using Amharic, using Afan Oromo, they're using Tigrinya. This is just outside of, what Ethiopians traditionally would do. And then there's, of course, all kinds of other influences that are occurring. I can go on and on. There's the agitation propaganda, ethnic incitement. I think we've seen that. images of violent content, inflammatory messaging are all parts, part and parcel of the campaign that seeks to generate what I like to call the negative feedback loop on social media. So somebody wants the attention, or if somebody wants a negative reaction from a certain group or content, they just post something that's negative about that group, and they wait and bait that group to come back, or proponents to come back and do that. And this is a calculated way to instigate a reaction. And I think what we've seen recently is pictures and videos that were uploaded by certain groups that targeting certain ethnic groups that kind of like was inflammatory, and it created a backlash. And I think we've seen some of the protests in the Amhara region recently were partly driven by that, and that was exactly the reaction that they wanted, right? Because they want to be able to divide the country even further along ethnic lines. So social media has been, by and large, it has muddied the waters. It has created an environment that's very, very antagonistic. While I will say that now, but since you asked me about the positive, I think the positive is there. That there's a lot of stuff people can do online. People can be productive. There's business models online. We all know that. There are people that sell goods and services on Facebook in Ethiopia. There are people that have really good educational platforms on YouTube. There are people that are trying to bring people together on YouTube. But the fundamental nature of the algorithm means that in a country that's already divided, it's just going to create more division. It's not going to bridge the gap.
Okay, Danielle. So as we know, June, Ethiopia is facing elections, and as you know, and as you already mentioned, that our social media usage has increased, and social media is already playing a role in shaping the minds of the citizens. We're witnessing a lot of hate speech, extreme ideologies, instigating conflicts, and so forth. What are the positive and negative about the fact that we're actually, approaching elections for Ethiopians in Ethiopia? Of course, we're American, so we're not voting, but we're obviously concerned, and we want to know, how the public should handle this, and what are the best ways for them to filter information, and what is your overall outlook about social media and elections in a country that is developing altogether?
Yeah, so with that, I would say it's obviously, I would say it's very dangerous, and you don't have to go look at Ethiopia. I think all you have to do is look at the United States in the last 4 or 5 years and see what the effects of social media have been to the elections here. Now, there's no doubt right now that social media content is really becoming, antithetical to democratic process. And we recently got a big, strong whiff of that during the last days of the Trump presidency, and the disturbances around the Capitol, which were mainly fringe groups motivated by online narratives. Now, ask yourself, like, if the United States, with its sophisticated and pioneering information technology sector, and mature democracy, is having a hard time controlling this kind of narrative, what chances does a complex, developing, very diverse, and very polarized society like Ethiopia have with social media? So all the signs are not positive. I think the negative outweighs the positive here for the election, and we're already seeing it. We're seeing extremist content, and I don't think this has anything to do with the people of Ethiopia per se. I think there are malicious actors that are foreign, that are sponsoring this kind of content. When I say foreign, I'm also including the diaspora, because as far as Ethiopians are concerned, we're not Ethiopian citizens. We don't have, a lot of people here don't have skin in the game. If you're brandishing a U.S. passport and you can say any inflammatory content on social media, you have no repercussion, you have no consequence. So as far as Ethiopians are concerned, you're a foreign national. So that's what's happening. I think a lot of people based here under different factions are exasperating the situation there, making the democratic process really difficult. And I think the government is taking note. And what needs to happen now is there has to be some kind of consensus among leadership to look at some sort of way to, I wouldn't say censor, censorship is a strong word, but I think there has to be some sort of technological and IT-based solutions to this. And we're already kind of started seeing that. We know the current leadership in the country is very receptive to this idea. We're already seeing encouraging signs towards this goal, but I think it goes without saying that it needs to speed up. And moreover, in the long run, social media that is beholden and dependent on foreign, national control is ultimately not going to be responsive to the needs and desires of Ethiopians. I mean, Facebook is in California. They don't care what happens in Ethiopia by and large. Their constituencies are mostly American. Right? The American Congress means more to them than the Ethiopian Parliament. Now that could change in the future. Right, that can change. There may be influence. There may be some level of influence, but the level of influence is not there yet. So, I think the Ethiopian people, like I mentioned, there's a echo chambered algorithm. You're only going to see things that you like and over again. If you like extremist content, that's all you're going to be fed all day, every day. And if that's the kind of content that you share, that's what your friends are going to see. So you're going to, democracy requires us to be able to listen and talk to people that are different from us. It requires us to be able to cross lines and talk to people, understand them, but this kind of social media content doesn't really allow it. It's very, I would say it's very antithetical to democracy. It's very antagonistic. And you cannot build a healthy democracy based on that kind of structure. So I think it bodes really bad for the election. I think people are already waking up to it. Especially in the top leadership, they're finding out that there needs to be some kind of control. But I think, before you even get to the social media, there are traditional media outlets that are fomenting this kind of extremism that is very negative, and that's very hard for people to, go past their differences, because democracy fundamentally means overcoming your differences through dialogue. You can't do that if your dialogue is based on, negativity. And if your dialogue is based on extremist content, if your dialogue is based on violent content increasingly, you can't build a democracy based on that. So that has to be controlled, and there has to be a technological solution to control that environment. So I'm hoping this election will go peacefully. I'm pretty sure it will. I have confidence that it will, but I think it's important that we take note and prepare for the future, because increasingly social media is going to become more and more important. The recent events, so the recent killing of civilians, particularly in certain areas of the country. I want to just emphasize those killings are primarily being done for media consumption, and more of those killings are being done for consumption on social media. And the whole point behind those killings is to get a reaction from the victim side, right? And that's what I'm talking about, the negative feedback loop that develops in this kind of extremist trend that we're seeing in Ethiopia, especially on social media. So, you don't need that much to harm a certain number of civilians that are like in some remote village. You go in, you kill them, you record the data, you record information, you spread it through your networks, it spreads, you get a reaction from the other side. And as this continues, that's how you weaken the central government. That's how you weaken trust in government. That's how you weaken trust in society. And that is exactly the goal, right? That's what's happening. So these are small fringe groups that are doing this. They don't represent a community. They don't represent an ethnic group. They're just doing it because they feel like this is the easiest path to power. Sometimes it's not even power. They probably will not come to power, but this is a way to finance themselves. This is a way to continue to become relevant. This is a way to make money, because there are, a lot of foreign actors that are paying for this kind of stuff. A lot of this is secret. So, and I think, but at this point, it's beyond. There's no doubt about it anymore that this is what's happening, and they're succeeding. And so, it's very important that we use, again, technological and IT-based solutions to clamp down on this kind of activity online. It's being done here in this country. It happens all the time. The United States government does it all the time. There's a lot of extremist content that's not allowed here. So it should be the same everywhere. Ethiopia is no different. So this has nothing to do with blocking free speech or censorship. this has to do with protecting civilians. This has to do with protecting the society in large. So I hope the government is going to go in that direction, and I hope they really start discussing this topic and researching and bringing in people that are engineers and software developers and technicians to the conversation as well.
Thank you so much. I think you're really giving us a great insight about social media, the importance of managing it the right way, and at the same time how it's being used. And I don't think the public, even including myself, knew how social media really works, and how we're kind of circled into seeing the same kind of information that we want to see, or that we're liking, and therefore we kind of are being tunnel vision too. So it's really it's kind of something that we really need to watch out, because we could really be engineered through the information that we're learning. So thank you very much for sharing that information. So what are your recommendations for Ethiopia? What is, policy wise, that's one of your expertise is in policy. So what are your recommendations for Ethiopia? What should we implement? What should the society expect? Yes, censorship is a hard word, but there is freedom, and then there is also freedom to protect. So what are your recommendations in general for the coming elections? And then even beyond that, what are some of the things that we can do, or what other countries have you seen implementing certain policies to protect their citizens from such polarization?
Yeah, sure. So, Lida, thank you very much again. I think, like I mentioned, the info war business is real, and more nation states are using it. Foreign intelligence services are using information war to, for their political purposes, whether it's to interfere in the elections, like we've seen with Russia and the United States. But imagine even the smaller countries. I mean, the big countries are using social media to influence smaller countries. When I say smaller countries, I don't mean size. I mean developing countries like Ethiopia. So Ethiopia needs to think primarily about generating domestic know-how and capacity in cybersecurity. We know, like I mentioned earlier, the leadership of the country currently is very receptive to this idea, and we're already seeing very encouraging signs towards this goal. But it goes without saying that this needs to be sped up. And moreover, like I think in the long run, social media that is beholden and dependent on foreign national control, like I mentioned, is ultimately not going to be responsible to the needs of the people of that country, right? So that's what Ethiopia faces. All of the social media platforms in Ethiopia none of them are domestic based. All of them are foreign. So, and I think the Ethiopian government should have a long-term and a short-term plan. I think the short-term plan is to be able to make sure that we have, given the current polarization, the coming elections, the filling of the dam, given the international pressure, the massive international pressure that's coming from outside, there has to be some level of control to social media currently. I'm not saying full-out censorship, but there needs to be some kind of, the fringe elements in social media should need to be identified. I prefer that to be IT-based, technology-based kind of approach, instead of legislation, because you remember there was a legislation that the parliament passed recently. When I say recently, I think it was last year. There was a penalty that you paid if you incited violence online, or if you shared something that was inflammatory. You paid a penalty of something like 20,000 birr or something like that, or and then you got some jail time. But it was really hard to find out who's spreading hate or who's spreading extremism, because they're all fake accounts. they don't have addresses. I mean, they can probably trace their IP addresses, but by and large, those IP addresses are overseas. They're not even in Ethiopia. So, most of them are diaspora based. Some of them are actually working for foreign countries. It could be, Egypt. It could be countries that we are currently kind of in a bad relationship with. So there needs to be some kind of tech-based, technology-based, engineering-based system to control this kind of content. And I hope, in the long run, I think Ethiopia will create some kind of home-based social media platform outside of Facebook, outside of Twitter, outside of YouTube. And that is possible. There's a lot of, very savvy engineers in Ethiopia, young people that are interested in this kind of work. And the recent, inauguration of the building that Prime Minister Abiy showed. I believe it was INSA. So that was good progress, but again, it's just a starting point, and I hope that's going to grow, and I hope we're going to be able to have our own platform in the future. Now, other examples, if you go to other countries, bigger countries, they have their own platforms. I think the most famous one is China. China definitely does not allow any outside platforms. They don't have Facebook, they don't have Google, they don't have YouTube, but they have their own very competitive, very large scale platforms like YouTube, like WeChat, like Baidu. They have all of these systems that are, I think the censorship in China is very heavy. I'm not saying we should go that route. The Chinese model is different, but the technology is there if we wanted to create it. And it's increasingly becoming affordable. It's increasingly becoming accessible to do so. We're going to get pushback, of course, because, if Facebook is banned from Ethiopia, Facebook is going to lobby the American government to pressure Ethiopia to open up Facebook, right? That's natural. That's what they're going to do. I would do the same thing if I were them, but we have to be ready for that. And we have to be able to kind of have a counter narrative to, educate people, not just in Ethiopia, but also in America about, some of the real causes. People are dying because of, content on Facebook. I think the recent example of, I think the town that burned in Ataye, that was a real disaster. I mean, just a fringe, small extremist elements can go into a town, burn a village, upload a video. It goes, it goes wild, and then you get a reaction exactly like they want. And you get extremism on the other side, because the other side that feels like they've been attacked, and then they upload their extremist video to incite more violence on this side. So you can't build a democracy in this kind of environment. So I think social media control is really key. Now, again, I'm not saying that. I think ultimately the responsibility to protect falls on the government. I'm not excusing the government for failing in the security sector there, but I think social media definitely exponentially worsen the situation. And that's what happens when you have an open media. So I think we need to start taking it more seriously. It needs to be part of the national conversation. I think like this is good, I think, but it needs to be a lot wider. A lot more people need to be involved. And I hope this continues.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I think social media does play a lot of, plays a role that is very significant, both for positive and negative is what I got from our discussion. From your last comment, one of the things about extremism and how it really thrives in social media is that extremism is not something that, in my opinion, is something that is very difficult for governments to control. Even eventually, when trends starts occurring, and when people start realizing, the organizations, the extremist organizations, or their followers, or their financiers, and also for when details starts being collected, then I think governments are able to kind of be successful. But initially, when extremist elements are acting out, it's, in my opinion, very difficult to contain them. And like you said, because of that failure, I mean, we see that in the U.S. as well. We have shootings in schools, and we have targeted people being targeted, like recently the Asian Americans being targeted, and so forth. And it's really hard to blame the government initially when these kind of things take hold, because it needs further study. But on the other hand, what we are having difficulty with, especially in Ethiopia, is social media is further fueling the problem, making it even more difficult to contain some of these extreme ideologies and extreme actions that's being taken in the country. I really thank you for your time. I know it's a very short but sweet discussion that we've had. It's the holidays. I wish you and your family happy Easter, Melkam Fasika, if you're celebrating. Yeah. And to our audiences as well. I know my background is a little bit noisy. We're celebrating.
Yeah, no, thank you, Lilith, for inviting me. This has been a very exciting, conversation. There's a lot to be said, right? There's so much to be said here. It's definitely not the end of the conversation, but I think we're starting off, no matter how small. We just have to continue. Like, journey of a thousand miles starts with one step. So we just have to. I really appreciate that you are taking the leadership here, and I hope that we can continue this conversation. It's a very important one to have. I think social media is always going to be more impactful, not less, in the future. We're getting more digitalization, we're getting more info war, we're getting more, disinformation online. That's just going to continue. So we might as well be prepared for it now. So um, the earlier the better. So yeah, thank you for inviting me, and I really appreciated the talk.
Thank you, Daniel. I'll definitely be keeping in touch with you and obviously working with you as well. I'm really honored to have you as a guest, and hopefully you'll come back with some more um, uh, comments and recommendations with policies.
Sure.
Prime Log audiences, thank you so much for joining us. I'll be back next week with another guest. Um, have a great weekend and see you next week.